Welcome to the 6th Annual Quit Sugar Summit, where the world's leading professors, scientists, MDs, PhDs, coaches, addiction specialists, and dietitians bring you all the information you need to change your relationship with sugar. Here's your speaker. Hey everybody, it's Mike with the Quit Sugar Summit. How are you? Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm here with the famous Dr. Lustig, Robert Lustig, who's probably the de facto leader of all this sugar stuff. Got it started about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago now, probably, with The Bitter Truth.
It's longer than 6 or 7. I mean, that was 11 years ago.
Wow. Wow. Nice.
It takes a while, for a Rolling Stone to gather moss.
That one jumped out of the box pretty fast, though, right? They went to a million before you even probably blinked your eyes, right? Went pretty quick.
The first million actually was probably the slowest.
Okay.
It actually picked up, and right now I have to tell you, from 11 to 12 million has been very, very fast, and I'm still blown away every time. I look at the number, I go, what is wrong with these people? Don't they have 90 minutes better to do than watch this?
Well, guys, check it out. It's The Bitter Truth on YouTube. It's a 90-minute college lecture, and it's just amazing that people were gravitated towards it.
Yeah,
and,
I'll say.
And it's good.
I don't understand it, but okay.
I think it's wonderful. I think that people they need this awareness now. It's coming. And your books, Fat Chance and Hacking the American Mind, can't follow that. And, I don't know, a lot of people don't know this, but you got a law degree so you could understand the policy effects of this, and retired to pretty much work more and do this full time.
Pretty much, basically my portfolio is exactly the same as it was when I was seeing patients. The only thing is I'm not seeing patients. I still consult, I still do research, I still write policy briefs. I'm still, involved in a lot of ways. I write books. So I haven't really slowed down. I'm just not doing patient care. That was an enormous time sink. And while I enjoyed it, it got harder and harder in terms of, just the medicine of it. Because of the nature of insurance and the electronic medical record. It was really the electronic medical record that made me retire. I could not deal with it.
Yeah, but you also saw, which I think motivated you to see these overweight kids and these kids with fatty liver and stuff, right? That's that.
Yeah. Well, I saw my first kid with fatty liver disease in 1997. 1997, when I was in Memphis, Tennessee. And I had no friggin' clue what was going on with that kid. And he was an anomaly. We ended up having a clinical pathologic conference about him, and nobody understood what was going on. And, then the next kid showed up with it. And then the next kid showed up with it. And, by the time I moved to San Francisco, basically everybody had showed up with it. And now it is, 25% of children and 40 to 45% of adults. And it's not even because of obesity, because plenty of people with BMIs under 25 have fatty liver disease as well. And when you have fatty liver disease, you have metabolic dysfunction. And when you have metabolic dysfunction, you have early mortality. That's what we know. And so figuring out what the cause of this was, to be honest with you, it's a bigger epidemic than COVID, because it affects a whole lot more people and ultimately causes a lot more death. It's just that it goes under the wire. It's not acute, it's chronic. Wow.
Crazy. That's wild. So we were talking before we got started that you've made my job quite easy, and I want to get into this only because I've said this many times that I have these conversations for myself. That it's a little bit selfish, and people seem to enjoy them. So your new book, I mean, right from the beginning, the name of it is metabolical. then congratulations on how you did that. I
Well,
mean,
actually, you can credit my social media director, Wolfram, with coming up with that.
Wolfram's on the summit. I love Wolfram, man.
Wolfram, it was his idea.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it was a good idea, and I like it a lot. I mean, it's a portmanteau of two words: metabolic, the workings of the body, and diabolical, the workings of big food, big pharma, and big government.
Right.
And it is basically half science, half expose.
Love it, man. And, you know, for you folks, it's not coming out till May, but it's also on pre-sale on Amazon and on drlustig.com/metabolical. So you can check it out. But the questions or the things that you talk about, the first one, medicine for chronic disease treats symptoms, not the disease itself.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. High LDL, is that the disease or is that the symptom of the disease? Mm-hmm. And when you treat the symptom, the disease is still there. It's like giving an aspirin to a patient with a headache because they have a brain tumor. Mm-hmm. You know, it might alleviate the headache, but it ain't going to do a damn thing for the brain tumor. So lowering LDL with, say, a statin. Now, if you have familial hypercholesterolemia, if you have a genetic reason for your very high LDL, then a statin makes a lot of sense, and so does a low-fat diet, and so does a lot of prayer. But if you have a high LDL because you have metabolic syndrome, and the way you'll know that is because you'll also have a high triglyceride level. Lowering your LDL with statins is not solving your problem. It is just papering over your problem. Yes, you will lower your LDL, but do you know what that means in terms of longevity? People who go on statins for primary prevention of metabolic syndrome, their increased lifespan is 4 days over control.
Oh, goodness.
That's how much you get out of it, is 4 days. Right. If you're treating the wrong disease. Mm-hmm. So if you're treating a genetic problem of high LDL, then, you know, lowering LDL makes sense. If you're treating metabolic dysfunction, of which high LDL is a symptom, then you have to treat the cause, not the symptom. Same is true for high blood glucose. Getting the blood glucose down, say with insulin, it's good for your kidneys. It's bad for your heart. It's good for your microvascular diseases, such as retinopathy, nephropathy, neuropathy. It's bad for the macrovascular diseases, such as coronary disease, stroke, and it's also bad for cancer. So turns out, if you look at the UKPDS, the ADVANCE, the ACCORD trials, they all showed that raising insulin to lower blood glucose has absolutely no improvement in morbidity and mortality.
Gotcha.
So, because you're treating the wrong problem. You're not treating the cause, you're treating the symptom. So treating the symptom doesn't work. Treating the cause works. But figuring out what the cause is, that's where you need some science and medicine.
I mean, a lot of people know, but we find that about 70% of the folks are pretty new to all of this stuff and the idea that even getting off the sugar and getting off the stuff. So tell them about, as simple as you can, a definition of metabolic syndrome. What is the constellation of things that make it up? What actually is it?
Right. That's a really, really good question. And it depends on how you define it. Depends on who's doing the defining as to what the definition is. The definition has been, still is, a cluster of diseases that go together that are all related to obesity. That is type 2 diabetes, hypertension, lipid problems, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease. So this is a cluster of diseases that travel together. No argument, that is all true. And it first got the name Syndrome X. Jerry Reven coined that in 1988. And then ultimately the term metabolic syndrome stuck, right? This is garbage. This is absolute garbage. And the reason it's garbage is because the way the diagnosis of metabolic syndrome was made was by basically achieving cutoffs of these various phenomena, like blood pressure. Okay, so like for instance, if you have a blood pressure, a systolic blood pressure at the 95th percentile for age, you have metabolic syndrome. But if your systolic blood pressure is at the 94th percentile, right, you don't.
Right.
Okay. You know, this idiotic, notion of a cutoff when you have a skewed kurtotic distribution and it's unimodal, but it's, pushed all the way to the side, it makes like no sense. Mm-hmm. But that's the way metabolic syndrome was defined, initially. It is actually much easier to define metabolic syndrome mechanistically. That is, where is the insulin resistance? The one thing that everyone agrees on is that metabolic syndrome is the ultimate expression of this phenomenon called insulin resistance. That is, your insulin doesn't work right. Not because it's low, but because it's high. It doesn't work right. And the question is, where doesn't it work right? Well, if it didn't work right at your fat cell, you'd be thin. But most people with metabolic syndrome are fat. So in fact, the insulin's working fine at the fat cell. Where it's not working fine is at the liver. So what we've learned is there's not one metabolic syndrome. There's three. And it has to do with three different fat depots. But each of the fat depots contribute a different level of risk. And that's the point. So here are the three fat depots, and here's how it works. The first one, big butt fat, subcutaneous fat, the cosmetically undesirable fat, the fat that when you stand on the scale registers, the fat of, does this dress make me look fat? That fat.
Yeah, don't answer that question.
Never answer that question. Never
answer that question.
Right. Okay, big butt fat. Turns out big butt fat is actually relatively metabolically benign. You have to get up to a hell of a lot of fat before it will cause metabolic disturbance. Okay, and the reason that big butt fat is metabolically benign is because when you overload those subcutaneous fat cells, and they then end up getting macrophages in them, and some of them spill their contents, it goes into the systemic circulation and it gets diluted there. And it doesn't raise levels of cytokines very high. And that means your liver doesn't see very much of a increase in concentration, which means your liver continues to function pretty normally. Eventually, you can become so enormous that you can finally end up seeing a peripheral signal that will ultimately reach the liver, and then the liver will start doing bad things with that signal. So can you get metabolic syndrome from being too fat, with subcutaneous fat? And the answer is yes, but it's really hard to do. You got to really work at it. Okay. Second fat depot, visceral fat, big belly fat. Okay, stuff around your spare tire. Okay, that's a different fat. And the reason it's a different fat is because its primary driver is stress and cortisol, not food. And the reason we know this is because people who are clinically depressed lose weight, but increase their belly fat. And because the belly fat, because the visceral fat drains via the portal circulation right into the liver is seeing a higher concentration at a lower fat increase. So if you put on even 2 pounds of belly fat, you're going to basically transduce a signal at the liver that's going to make your liver unhappy. So for sub-Q fat, for big butt fat, you might need 20 to 30 pounds of fat before you'll get metabolically ill. For visceral fat, you might need about 5 pounds. so maybe even 4 pounds before you start seeing, metabolic dysfunction. And that's due to stress, not eating. And then finally, the third fat depot, which I think is actually the most important and relates to this whole question we started with about fatty liver, is liver fat, the fat inside your liver. And that is working right at the fat cell. And it turns out even a pound, even a half a pound of fat in your liver will drive all these metabolic dysfunctions. Because it doesn't have to get to the liver, it's already there. And it's already causing liver cells to be dysfunctional and then not respond to the insulin signal. So hepatic liver insulin resistance. So the question is, where did the liver fat come from? And there, the answer is very clear now. Sugar. Or alcohol. But kids don't drink alcohol.
Right.
And so sugar gets mainlined right to the liver, makes fatty liver right there, right at the spot that matters the most. And so only a little liver fat will cause metabolic dysfunction, which is why 88% of Americans are metabolically ill, irrespective of their weight. So metabolic syndrome is totally dependent on which fat depot is causing you the problem. And if you don't address that fat depot, then you're not going to fix the problem.
So I have a question. It's amazing. It's following these bullets on Amazon and the book Metabolical. It's like, it says you can diagnose your own biochemical profile. So like back in the day, you had to stick a big needle in your liver to find this out, right? But are there ways
to do that? You don't need to do that. There are ways to do it that are, a little less invasive and a little cheaper than sticking a needle in there. Sticking a needle in there is still the sine qua non. It's still the, pathognomonic test for fatty liver disease. But there are ways to find out where you don't have to do that.
Can you tell us a couple?
Oh, sure. I mean, the cheapest, the freest, the one that costs $0, your waist circumference. Now, that's not measuring your liver fat per se. It's measuring your liver fat plus your visceral fat together. But often they do run together. And so if your waist circumference is over 40 inches for a male or over 35 inches for a female, there's a pretty good chance you got some fatty liver going.
Okay.
Now, it's not sensitive, but it's not specific, but it is sensitive. That's free. If you want to then go to the next level, it would be a lab test. It's an ALT, alanine aminotransferase. And the problem with it is it's a standard test that's done on, virtually every chem panel. The problem is that the reference range is wrong. It has changed. When I entered medical school in 1976, the upper limit of normal for ALT was 25. Today, the upper limit for ALT is 40. Now, what happened? Did the assay change? No, we changed. Turns out the way you determine a normal range is you take thousands and thousands of people who say they have no disease, and you do the mean and the standard deviation, and 2 standard deviations above the mean. That's the edge. All right. Point is that these people all thought they were healthy. They're not. They actually have fatty liver. They just don't know it because it's a silent killer. Okay. You have to get really, really, really bad fatty liver before you know that you have fatty liver.
Gotcha.
So basically, the entire curve of the entire population shifted to the right over the course of the last 40 years. And so now 2 standard deviations above the mean is at 40. But 40 years ago, 2 standard deviations above the mean was 25. We should be using 25. And if you use 25, then ALT is a good sensitive marker of fatty liver.
Did you say 85% of the population has some form of fatty liver? Is that what you said?
It has some form of metabolic dysfunction. Any of which are fatty liver.
Gotcha. That's amazing. So, I mean, let's let's move on. As I want to get as much into solution as we can, it seems like the last part of this is all about, it says chronic diseases are not druggable, but they're foodable. I love that line. Right. So, can you expound on it? I mean, there's no way you're giving away this book. So just we'll try and spend maybe like 5 or 10 minutes on each little thing. That'll be great.
Well, so what the book does is it debunks this notion of chronic disease.
Yeah.
Okay? People think, aging is, a given, that basically, once you hit 60, 70, your body breaks down. This is garbage. Right? We've learned to accept that because everyone does it, because it's, quote, standard. Therefore, it's, quote, normal. Right. Garbage. Okay. Right. Yep. There are 110-year-olds playing tennis. Yep. Okay. And there are 40-year-olds on dialysis, with one side of their body not moving from their stroke, waiting for the Grim Reaper. Right. So, what's the difference? Turns out that non-communicable disease, chronic metabolic disease, metabolic syndrome, is actually due to 8 subcellular pathologies that go on inside the cell that cause the cell to be dysfunctional. That metabolic dysfunction could be due to any one of a combination of 8 processes. Now, it turns out none of those processes has an ICD-9, 10, or 11 code. None of those processes are things that a doctor can bill for. Therefore, they're not diseases.
Right.
Because there's no ICD-11 code. In addition, there are very few diagnostic markers, biomarkers. But you can figure it out, and that's what the book explains. So here are the 8. Let me list them for you.
Please.
Ready?
Please.
Glycation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, insulin resistance, membrane instability, inflammation, methylation, and autophagy. Now, each of those is a standard process that goes on in the body. The question is, how fast, how much, and will it hurt you? And the answer is, yeah, all of those, if they're not working right, will hurt you. It turns out when you look at the molecular mechanisms of each of those, when you look at the cofactors, the transcriptional regulators, none of them have a medicine. None of them are drug targetable.
I love this.
Inside the cell, you can't get there, but they are foodable. And so that's chapter 10 of the book. Foodable, not druggable.
Right.
So if you ate right, you could fix all 8 of these, but we don't.
Is there something that people, any telltale symptoms that this overarching term of inflammation that manifest on the outside of the body that people can see?
Well, there are a lot of things that go into inflammation. The inflammation is primarily gut inflammation. Okay. This concept of leaky gut, okay, which is a relatively new term, maybe 6, 7, 8 years old now. Right. But basically, either because of antibiotics that have affected the microbiome, or because of lack of fiber, or because of specific things in the food, like, for instance, food additives or stabilizers or emulsifiers. Ultimately, it eats away at the barrier in your intestinal lumen, okay, which is a mucin layer that sits on top of your intestinal epithelial cells. And the epithelial cells are tied together through what are known as tight junctions, like so. And the tight junctions are specific proteins. They have a name called zonulins. And it is zonulins that are the problem in celiac disease. Now, in celiac disease, you have a specific allergen. There's a specific protein in wheat, 2 proteins actually, gliadin and glutenin. Together they form gluten. And they are a specific allergen to people with celiac disease. But it turns out there are a lot of different things in food that can cause intestinal inflammation. And when that happens, you can end up causing those tight junctions to release. And now what you have is a passageway, a porous passageway between your intestinal lumen, between your gut, which is the dirtiest place in the world, okay, and your portal vein, which is supposed to be completely safe and clean. But we know, because you can measure endotoxins from the intestine in your circulation, that intestinal barrier has been breached. And so that inflammation is going on primarily, not completely, but primarily at the level of the gut. And when that gut inflammation occurs, where's it going? Via the portal vein, straight to the liver. And now you've got insulin resistance too.
Doesn't it manifest in skin conditions, acne and psoriasis and all that kind of good stuff?
And it absolutely, you know, eczema, psoriasis, many of the autoimmune diseases we know today, you know, if you could fix your gut, the autoimmune diseases would get better. And this is a little known thing that I found out, you know, only through researching the book. I learned it from an immunologist at Oxford, a very classy, cool, you know, 88-year-old guy named Alan Ebringer. And I give him a tremendous amount of credit. Once upon a time, there was, I mean, back in the day, they first learned about the fact that autoimmune diseases had a genetic component. And the one that was the most notable was ankylosing spondylitis. Ankylosing spondylitis, HLA-B27 is associated with ankylosing spondylitis. And he's done a lot of work on these various autoimmune diseases, both ankylosing spondylitis and also rheumatoid arthritis. Okay. And what he found out was that the antibodies that are formed that, you know, go on in ankylosing spondylitis also are antibodies against a specific gut bacterium called Klebsiella pneumoniae. And in rheumatoid arthritis, the antibodies against the joint were also antibodies against a different gut bacterium called Proteus mirabilis. So it turned, by, you know, looking at these, at the differences and the similarities between what the antibodies were attacking in the body versus what the antibodies were directed to in the gut, they were able to, he and his team were able to piece out that what had happened was that somehow, due to leaky gut, these specific bacteria entered the bloodstream, you generated an antibody response against them. And then now you've got, through a process which we call molecular mimicry, now you've got antibodies against your own body tissues. Now, this is not a new idea. It's been around for a while. But the thing that's now super interesting is that those bacteria, like for instance, Klebsiella pneumoniae, they love starch. They love starch. In fact, the enzyme that we have in our intestine that breaks down starch into its component glucose molecules comes from the Klebsiella, not from us. The Klebsiella donates that enzyme to us so that we can break it down. But in fact, it's theirs. So they are really the starch breaker downers.
Okay.
Well, guess what happens if you go on a low carb diet? You're depriving those Klebsiella.
Okay.
And so what happens to your ankylosing spondylitis?
Goes away.
Gets better. Yeah. It reverses.
Nice.
And what happens to your rheumatoid arthritis? Gets better.
Hands and knees. Everybody that I work with, their hands and knees get better quickly.
So, you know, there's a real honest to goodness molecular mechanism. And I got to tell you, I am, you know, I was very wary of this, you know, story. It sounded a little too pat, a little too good to be true. The data are pretty robust.
Nice.
And so I'm thinking that, you know, there's a big difference in terms of what you eat versus how, you know, how sick you get based on, you know, what's going on in your gut.
Nice. So the next one's right up my alley, and I obviously don't know the science, but processed food isn't just toxic, it's addictive.
Indeed.
I mean, you've come a long way, even in the addictive part of it, I think, if you're from what I've studied in the early days to now. So tell me where people are afraid of this word, Rob. They don't like addiction. They don't like addict. Google doesn't like it. But I think it's apt. It's the correct word for now.
Now you can't even get that signal transduction anymore because you don't have the neurons to do it. And so when you then go off the stimulus, whatever it is, okay, now you've got withdrawal. And so tolerance and withdrawal, or tolerance and dependence, that's addiction. So, while I don't care what Webster says, all right, and I know Webster very well because I've had to, research, these things very carefully. Right. The fact of the matter is, tolerance and dependence, and sugar exhibits both tolerance and dependence. Therefore, it's addictive. And ultra-processed food being the carrier for sugar, 62% of the items in the grocery store, have added, actually 74% have added sugar. 62% of the added sugar is in specifically the ultra-processed food category. Okay. So ultra-processed foods by their very nature are addictive. And, Michael Moss, of course, wrote about this in his famous book, Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us. The data are there. The data are there. And so I have a chapter in my new book, Metabolical, that basically tracks the science of this entire question.
Nice. I mean, I've known it intuitively. And if you talk to anyone that's lost 100, 200 pounds, they know that it's an addiction like drugs or alcohol. A lot of the folks that we're working with now are recovering alcoholics and drug addicts. And to a man, to a woman, everyone said getting off sugar was harder. Every single one.
Because it's in everything.
Right.
At least you know what alcohol's in.
Yeah.
You don't know what sugar's in. Did you know that sugar was in your bread?
Right.
Did you know that sugar was in your salad dressing? It's hidden. And there are a lot of names for sugar. There's only one name for alcohol.
Right, exactly.
Okay? But there's a lot of names for sugar.
Right.
Okay? 262 to be exact.
Right.
So, and the food industry is allowed to put all of them on the label and you won't know what they are. Did you know that Pinocha was sugar? My favorite, of course, is evaporated cane juice.
Right.
What happens when you evaporate cane juice? What are you left with? You're left with sugar.
Right.
It's like a friggin' joke.
I'm glad you grew up in Brooklyn. I think. Is it Brooklyn?
I did.
Yeah. You're like, you don't care about these. You don't care about their feelings.
No.
I think it's great.
Really?
So
what are they?
Yeah, well, not when they've already made their billions, right? They're like, and now I think they're realizing they got a little problem on their hands. That's why they're I guess in Nestle
they have a problem. They do not have a problem. The issue is they are planning to drive this bus till the wheels fall off.
Right.
And then they're going to swoop in with the, food 2.0 and tell us all that they rescued us.
Yeah, right, exactly. So there's one that's coming up here that I just love. That's I'm really glad you wrote these bullets for me because I was making my job easier. The war between the vegans and the ketos is a false war. The combatants are on the same side. I am so freaking tired of this conversation, war, whatever the hell it is. How do we end it? How do we end it?
I will tell you, it's very hard because everyone seems to be a zealot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I am not a zealot.
Mm-hmm.
I am the opposite of a zealot. Okay. You gotta show me the science. At UCSF, we have a motto: in God we trust, everyone else has to produce the data.
Right. Okay.
And so I am all about the science, but when you actually look at how the vegan diet works, when it works, okay, it works because it keeps insulin down. Now, it just so happens that a vegan diet can make insulin go up because Coca-Cola, Doritos, Oreos are all vegan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
But so processed vegan is no better than, anything else. I mean, it's basically the standard American diet.
Right.
There's no meat. Okay. On the other hand, keto, okay, keto works. And I know why keto works. It works for two reasons. It works because it gets the insulin down and because beta hydroxybutyrate is a signaling molecule that signals AMP kinase and sirtuins to improve mitochondrial function. Now, the point is, you can do keto wrong also.
Right.
Processed keto is really no better than processed vegan.
Yep.
So if you do vegan right, if you do keto right, you will be getting your insulin down. And if you get your insulin down, you become insulin sensitive, okay, you will be healthier, you will live longer. And so the vegans and the ketos are actually, the ones who are doing it right, are actually on the same side. Okay. And they have a common enemy, which is processed food.
Right.
So they should actually be allied against processed food rather than fighting between each other. The problem is that too many people in both camps, on both sides, as the orange man would say, basically, they're zealots for their cause because ultimately, for them, it's really not about the science. It's about, their thought process, their religion, if you will.
Yeah, there's the nail on the head right there, isn't it? The zealot, the religious aspect of it, the animal rights and.
Well, it's more than that. In Metabolical, in chapter 4, I basically go into the religion, and where it came from, and the Seventh-day Adventists and John Harvey Kellogg, and Leanna Cooper, who started the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics in 1917. She was Kellogg's apprentice. We go into the expose part of it, right. Exactly where all this stuff came from.
So happy you did that. Belinda Fetke was on. If you guys want to listen to it, go there. There's an hour of this story. It will blow your mind.
Oh, I got a lot of this from Belinda.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. She's wonderful.
Yes, she is.
So you've got the last bullet here, and then we'll get into a couple other things. But big food, big pharma, and big government are on the other side. Now, most people, you actually have given me advice about stop worrying about these guys kind of thing. And you're essentially taking on quite a trio that you're taking on there. So
yeah, well, the truth is the truth.
Right.
And, people have said, look, you're either the bravest person in the world or the stupidest person.
Right.
Probably the stupidest person. But, what are you going to do? I mean, look what disaster we've got here.
Yeah.
It's and ultimately, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Mm-hmm. And so I'm casting, the sunlight on this issue. Right. In the book, okay, you've probably heard the term previously, moral hazard. Yeah. Moral hazard is making money off the misery of others.
Right.
Okay, it's like the economic version of Schadenfreude. Okay.
Right.
So the insurance industry is moral hazard. Right. They are actually happy when you got sick because then they could raise your rates. Okay. It was in their best interest for you to get sick.
Right.
Okay. They didn't make you sick. Okay. Sickness was around before there was insurance. That's why there was insurance. Okay. So, they didn't provide the illness. Okay.
Right.
But they were happy when you did get sick.
Right.
Okay? So they had moral hazard. The insurance industry is a moral hazard. Okay? In the book, what I describe, what I coin is immoral hazard, where you actually create the industry in order to profit off the misery of others.
Ugh.
And that's what Big Pharma has done. And that's what big food has done. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, that's what government has done too.
Government how? By sitting aside watching or not?
No, well, not just sitting aside watching, but actually because they make money off exports. You know, there's a lot. We export a lot of food, and the government gets the tariffs.
Right, right.
So they have made, they have made it easier for the food and the pharma industries to do this.
Okay.
I mean, this concept of immoral hazard should not be too, bizarre for anybody. It's what tobacco did. It's what the opioid companies did. And that's why Purdue Pharma is now out of business.
Sure.
Although none of the Sacklers are going to jail.
No.
And of course, none of the tobacco executives are going to jail.
Right.
Okay. So, why would anybody from the food industry be going to jail?
Mm-hmm.
So they have no reason not to do it. And that's the point of the book is it's got to be exposed.
Well, this kind of brings me to the wrapping it up and trying to figure out what's up next is like, what's the tipping point for this? I mean, we're all banging the drum out here, and but we don't seem to we don't seem to get like J-Lo and A-Rod go on a carb thing and social media explodes, and but we get the science and the addiction part, and we get all this out there, and we don't get any traction. How do we get there from here?
Well, that's a really good question is, what does it take? Right. And what it takes is people dying. The thing is, people are dying, okay? But people think they're dying because it was inherent,
Yeah, age. Right.
Their mother had diabetes, so of course they got diabetes. Sure. Yeah, their mother got diabetes, and they got diabetes because they ate the same shit.
That's right, exactly.
And if they understood that, they might feel a little bit differently about it.
Right.
So, patient, and consumer and public education has to come first. Right. You can't make a societal change unless you can bring the, society along with you. Mm-hmm. And so the way I describe it is, look, in the last 30 years, there have been four socio-cultural tectonic shifts in the world, not just in America, but in the world. Okay. Here are the four. Ready? Mm-hmm. Bicycle helmets and seatbelts. Smoking in public places.
Right.
Drunk driving. Condoms in bathrooms.
Yeah.
30 years ago, if a legislator had stood up in a state house or in Congress or Parliament or anywhere else in the world and had proposed legislation for any one of those four, they'd have gotten laughed right out of town. Mm-hmm. Nanny state, liberty interest, get out of my kitchen, get out of my bathroom, get out of my car. Okay?
And my bedroom.
And bedroom, right. Okay. Today, they're all facts of life.
Right.
Okay. And if you pull out of your driveway and you haven't clicked your belt buckle, your kids will friggin' scream at you.
Yep.
Okay. So how'd that happen? How come 30 years ago it wasn't even an issue, and today it's, your kids will scream at you? Mm-hmm. Why is that? Answer: we taught the children. The children grew up and they voted, and the naysayers are dead.
So this is attrition, huh?
This is attrition. It's a generational thing. Okay.
Right.
It takes a generation in order to turn it over. And that's why it takes 30 years. That's why it took 30 years for all of this to happen.
Right.
Okay. So for food, what I say is we're about 9 years in.
Okay.
Okay. This all started around 2010, 11, thereabouts. Okay. And people are starting to catch on, and we're teaching the kids. And now the kids know. And it's one of the reasons why McDonald's isn't doing as well as they used to. And they had to fire a whole bunch of people, including their CEO. All right. And so soda sales are down. You're seeing signs of it. All right. But it takes a long time before you can get over that, final hump to get to, true societal intervention where people will be supportive. But we're getting there. We're getting there. I mean, look, you got soda taxes in 6 cities and 28 countries around the world.
Nice.
It didn't come out of nowhere.
Right.
The seed was planted. The ground was plowed. We're getting there. So
do they use that money for anything to this end, or that it just go right into the coffers? Do you know?
It depends on the venue.
Yeah.
Mostly it just goes into the coffers. It ought to be earmarked for specific programs and
yeah.
Okay. My personal favorite is, why don't we tax soda and use the money from the tax to subsidize water?
You said that once before, and you really got me excited about that, because I'm a little bit of a water nut. You can probably see I have a water bar over there, and I have another one in my living room. Well, I think people should be drinking the damn stuff.
Be drinking water, right? Exactly.
Right.
Well, would they? The point is, if you subsidize the water and tax the soda, would they be drinking the water or the soda? I think they'd be drinking the water.
Nestle's got Aquapana down to freaking, buck 750 milliliters for like $1.20. I mean, it's crazy cheap.
Yeah, but look, the point is, you got to drink, and the beverage companies own the water companies. So, like, what's the difference? What's it to them?
Yeah, they don't care where it's coming from.
Just change the outside of the vending machine.
Right.
It's no big deal. So I think this will happen, and we're seeing it already. But I think it's going to happen en masse, and it just takes a while. With these tipping points, Malcolm Gladwell and all that. Okay, you don't even know when you've reached the edge of the cliff, but all of a sudden you're just on the downslope, and you couldn't even predict when that was. Example, smoking in Europe. Okay, we figured out in the 90s, because of what happened with the R.J. Reynolds and Brown and Williamson and Altria, when they got their what caught in the ringer back in the 90s, saying that tobacco was not nicotine was not addictive.
Nine CEOs standing up in front of Congress with their right hands up.
Exactly, but so we caught on, and we started cutting back on cigarette consumption. Well, that information was available to Europe, but no country in Europe changed their smoking habits until 2011. And no one knows why. And I've talked to Stan Glantz here at UCSF, and he still doesn't know why. But all of a sudden, they're smoking, and then like that, right off the cliff. And I don't know what did it, but they reached their tipping point.
Nice.
Okay. So at some point you reach the tipping point, and for food, it's coming.
Yep.
It's coming. Yep. You can see the signs of it. It's coming. I just don't know when.
Right.
But it's coming.
So you retired, you're writing books, you're working more than you worked before. What is Robert Lustig's part in all this? I mean, I've said earlier, you're probably the de facto leader in the space because of the science. And so, and more your vocal, I'm going to say it, balls to just say it out there in public.
Stupidity.
Yeah.
The question is, where are your cojones? Are they down here or are they up here?
Right. So what's your part? What do you see the next 10 years of your life doing as far as all this stuff? You're going to keep writing books, or you just started your own nonprofit, a different one, or
No. We merged with a separate.
Okay.
So we turned the Institute for Responsible Nutrition into Eat Real, which is doing great guns. Yeah. I'm also titularly involved in several startups to try to solve this problem with technology.
Okay.
One's a fiber company, one's a nutraceutical company, and one's a food procurement and personalized nutrition company.
Nice.
I'm involved in trying to write policy, helping the World Economic Forum, Davos. Got a meeting with them tomorrow. Nice. Because they see this as a major global problem. Okay. We are trying to, get the food industry to, read the writing on the wall. And we have several ways we're going about that. There's a whole bunch of things we're doing. And I'm still doing research.
Right.
And still, doing policy. I just put an article together for Nutrients called Ultra-Processed Food, Addictive, Toxic, and Ready for Regulation, which, lawyers are now poring over to see whether or not there's information to use, to try to bring the food industry to heel. And, the new book will be coming out in May. metabolical, and you know,
nice.
It's a thing.
It's a thing. It'll keep you busy for a long time.
It's a thing.
Rob, I really appreciate that. This is always a pleasure to speak with you. Always learn a lot, and it helps me to keep on keeping on, if you will. So
it's, hey, you know, it's going to happen.
Right.
I mean, it's already happening. Okay. It just hasn't hit that, you know, plateau that, you know, to fall off the other end of yet.
The black swan event. You never know when it's coming. And when it hits, you know, you better be ready.
That's it. There we are.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. You take it easy.
Bye-bye. We hope you're enjoying all the speakers. We know that 6 or 7 speakers a day is overwhelming, even during a lockdown. To be able to listen to all the speakers over and over again forever and get hundreds of dollars worth of sugar reduction bonuses, make sure that you click on the speakers package link and guarantee your success.